Hello, everyone. Something has been weighing heavily on me recently. I've been struggling to put my thoughts into words, but I figure it's better to say something than nothing at all. So here we go. We need to talk about the racism that Asians and Pacific Islanders face in America. There's been a recent increase in violence and hate towards the AAPI community, and it needs to stop. As an Asian American, I'm frustrated, exhausted, and frightened. Since the pandemic started, the AAPI community has had a target painted on their back. We have become a scapegoat for the problems facing our country. There have been so many incidents of hate and violence. Just this past week, 6 Asian women were killed in Atlanta in a targeted attack that was racially charged. An 84-year-old Thai man, out for a walk, brutally knocked to the ground and killed. An Asian family in Texas attacked and stabbed. A Filipino man in New York City subway slashed in the face with a box cutter. An Asian family at a restaurant in Monterey, California getting berated for being Asian. The list, unfortunately, goes on and on. And that's just what we know about that's been reported. There's much more violence and hate that goes unreported and unnoticed. This is deeply troubling, and while a lot of it can be attributed to the pandemic and the poor choice of words used by leadership in this country, the issues go deeper than that. Before I dive deeper, I want to talk a bit about the shooting in Atlanta, because it is what's prompted me to speak today. This was a racially charged shooting, no doubt about it. The shooter targeted 3 spa locations with predominantly Asian people and killed 8 total people, 6 of them Asian women. Now, the shooting alone is horrific and tragic. My heart goes out to the family and friends of the victims and also to the communities who are now traumatized and living in fear. But what's even more disturbing is some of the language and discussion afterwards. The fact that it's even a debate whether race is involved is an insult to the AAPI community. During a press conference, a police officer said the shooter had a, quote, bad day. This sympathizing of the shooter is absolutely ridiculous. I don't know about you, but when I have a bad day, I don't think of killing people. The police officer goes on to say that the shooter claims he has a sex addiction. My initial reaction was, what does a sex addiction have to do with any of this? The shooter's explanation is that he was trying to remove temptation. Think about the implication that is being made here. The implication that an Asian woman is somehow inherently a sexual temptation just by being an Asian woman. This is absolutely disgusting and ridiculous. This man blamed other people for his problems based on race and killed people because of that. There are deeper issues at play here, and we need to be aware of them. The AAPI community has a long history in the United States that is often excluded in our teachings. I had to go learn about a lot of the history on my own as an adult. The reality is that Asians face racism in America, and have been for quite some time now, going all the way back to the mid-1800s, when there was a wave of Chinese immigrants. They were treated extremely poorly and worked and lived in poor conditions. The Chinese massacre of 1871 occurred when an angry mob stormed into Chinatown in LA and killed and lynched an estimated 17 to 20 Chinese immigrants. This is one of the largest mass lynchings in U.S. history, but I never knew about it until fairly recently. The Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 banned Chinese people from immigrating to the U.S. This was not repealed until the Magnuson Act in 1943, and it wouldn't be until the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 that Chinese people were able to fully immigrate to the U.S. without racial barriers. The Japanese internment camps in the 1940s showed it didn't matter if you were born and raised in the U.S. or not even Japanese. As long as you looked remotely Japanese, you had to prove you were American and cast away your cultural history and identity. In 1982, the murder of Vincent Chin occurred. Once again, Asian people became the scapegoats as American auto industry struggled and German and Japanese auto companies flourished. 2 white men took out their frustrations on a Chinese-American man who isn't even Japanese. They beat him to death and did no jail time for it. The judge on the case saying, quote, "These weren't the kind of men you send to jail," end quote. The roots of anti-Asian sentiment go deep in this country, but our history in this country is often erased. We are deemed insignificant and left out of important conversations. We're only brought to the forefront when a country needs someone to blame. Systemic racism against the AAPI community exists. There are long-standing and harmful stereotypes. For example, the fetishizing of Asian women is one stereotype that continues to exist and is directly related to the Atlanta shooting. The model minority myth diminishes the real struggles Asian Americans face in this country. It also serves to pit the AAPI community against other minority groups. We need to start treating one another as human beings. The AAPI community is hurting and living in fear right now. We need help. Something needs to change. When you see injustices happening, don't turn a blind eye. If you want to know how to help, check out stopaapihate.org. I'm going to include a link in the description. But you can help by volunteering your time or donating money to provide resources to help others. Also, I encourage you to do your own research about Asian American history. What I've mentioned here is only the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot more to the struggles that the AAPI community faces. It's important to see the broader context of the Asian American experience. It is my hope that we can come together and create a better and brighter future. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.